My family laughed when I couldn't afford dinner. Then my assistant called about the $800K deal. I still remember the weight of my phone in my hand, screen glowing with Mia's message. Call me ASAP. Newman Corp just said yes. Full amount, $800K. The restaurant bathroom suddenly felt too small. The marble countertops too cold against my palms. 20 minutes earlier, my mother had slid her credit card across the table with a practiced sigh that screamed disappointment. Alexandra, darling, let me get this. We all know startups don't exactly pay the bills, do they? The laughter that followed from my family sliced through me, sharp and familiar. If only they knew what was happening 3,000 miles away, in a boardroom I'd spent 6 months trying to get into. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Alexandra Hayes, and 2 years ago I was a 28-year-old former marketing executive who'd committed the ultimate family sin, walking away from a 6-figure corporate job to build something that actually mattered. My parents didn't raise me to chase purpose. They raised me to chase paychecks. In the Hayes family, success had a very specific definition: prestigious titles, country club memberships, and homes with more bathrooms than people to use them. When I was 7, my father took me to his corner office in downtown Seattle, placed me in his Italian leather chair, and said, "Lexi, everything you see from this window could be yours someday." I remember my feet dangling above the floor, not even reaching the edge of the seat as I gazed out at the skyline. That view became the benchmark of what I was supposed to want, what I was expected to achieve. For 20 years, I followed the script perfectly: private school, then Northwestern for undergrad, MBA from Columbia. I climbed the corporate ladder at Patterson & Gray Marketing with mechanical precision, earning promotion after promotion until I had the coveted VP title before 30. My parents proudly displayed photos of me in business attire at every family gathering. "Our Alexandra, youngest VP in the company's history," they'd boast, as if reciting my greatest accomplishment. But something was happening beneath the surface of my picture-perfect career. I was drowning in the emptiness of it all, the pointless meetings about how to sell more products no one needed, the cutthroat politics, the soulless objectives. Each morning, I'd stare at myself in my bathroom mirror, designer outfit perfectly pressed, wondering if this hollow feeling would be with me forever. Then came the turning point. A Wednesday afternoon client meeting with a sustainable housing nonprofit that had somehow landed on our pro bono roster. They needed marketing help for their innovative low-cost housing solution. Homes built from recycled materials that cost 60% less than traditional construction. The passion in the director's eyes as she showed me photos of families receiving keys to their first homes cracked something open inside me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I researched everything I could about sustainable building materials, affordable housing solutions, the environmental impact of traditional construction. By morning, I had a vision forming, a company that could bridge the gap between eco-friendly innovation and accessibility. EcoFrame was born in my mind before sunrise. 2 weeks later, I walked into my boss's office and resigned. The shock on his face mirrored the reaction I knew I'd get from my family. "You're walking away from partner track to start some green building company? Are you having a breakdown, Alexandra?" He wasn't entirely wrong. It was a breakdown of sorts, my carefully constructed facade finally crumbling under the weight of my actual dreams. Telling my family was worse. We were gathered for Sunday dinner at my parents' waterfront home, a monthly tradition as rigid as the dress code that accompanied it. I waited until dessert, hoping the chocolate soufflé might soften the blow. "I've left Patterson & Gray," I announced, setting down my spoon. "I'm starting my own company focused on sustainable building materials." The silence that followed was deafening until my father cleared his throat. "Is this some sort of negotiation tactic for a better package? Because I know people who can help with that." "No, Dad, I'm serious. I've already filed the LLC paperwork. I've been researching this for months. My mother's hand flew to her pearl necklace, fingering it nervously. Her tell when she's deeply uncomfortable. Darling, you've worked so hard to get where you are. This sounds like a hobby. Perhaps you could explore it on weekends? My sister Sophia, always the practical one with her surgical precision in both her career as a dermatologist and her opinions, cut straight to the point. Do you have any idea how many startups fail in the first year? You're throwing away a career people would kill for. Only my brother Michael remained silent, studying me with curious eyes over his whiskey glass. Of all my family members, he was the one I couldn't read in that moment. I've made my decision, I said, straightening my spine against the Italian dining chair that suddenly felt like a throne of judgment. I believe in this. I've saved enough to float me for a year while I get things off the ground. My father set down his fork with a finality that signaled the end of his patience. Alexandra, I've indulged your independence since you were a child, but this is reckless. You're not just risking your career, you're risking your reputation. Our reputation. There it was. The true concern laid bare. Not my happiness, not my fulfillment, but how my choices would reflect on the Hayes family name. The weeks that followed were a blur of determined action and crushing doubt. I converted my spare bedroom into an office, pinning market research and material samples to every available wall. I hired Mia Chen, a brilliant recent graduate who shared my vision despite the laughably low salary I could offer. Together, we worked 18-hour days developing our first prototype, a modular wall panel made from compressed recycled plastic that outperformed traditional insulation by 40%. What we lacked in resources, we made up for in passion. Mia and I became a two-woman army, her technical brilliance complementing my marketing background. We entered sustainable innovation competitions, networked at environmental conferences, cold-called potential investors, and slowly built a small but devoted following on social media. 6 months in, we had a working prototype, promising test, results, and exactly 0 investors. My savings were dwindling faster than I'd anticipated. The startup costs for material testing alone had eaten through nearly half my runway. It was during this financial low point that my cousin's wedding brought the family together again. I'd scaled back on everything, moved to a smaller apartment, sold my designer wardrobe on consignment, even given up my car for public transportation. But family appearances were non-negotiable in the Hayes universe. The rehearsal dinner was held at Meridian, one of Seattle's most exclusive restaurants where the chef's tasting menu cost more than my monthly rent. I'd calculated exactly how much I could spend without jeopardizing next month's prototype testing. 1 glass of wine, the least expensive entree, no dessert. I was seated at a table with my immediate family and my aunt and uncle from Boston. The conversation flowed around me, vacation homes, private school acceptances, stock portfolios, while I quietly calculated material costs in my head for our next iteration. Alexandra, you've been quiet, my aunt remarked, eyeing my modest salmon dish. How's your little... Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Project going? I forced a smile. It's going well, actually. We've finalized our first prototype and we're in talks with several potential investors. The latter was a stretch. We had meetings scheduled, but nothing concrete. My mother exchanged a look with my father that I pretended not to notice. My brother Michael, slightly buzzed from his third scotch, leaned in conspiratorially. Come on, Lexi, level with us. When are you going to admit this was a phase and go back to a real job? Patterson would take you back in a heartbeat. Before I could answer, the waiter appeared with the bill. My father reached for it automatically, but I intercepted. I'll get my portion. I knew exactly what my meal cost. $42 plus the $14 glass of wine. I counted out exact cash from my wallet and placed it on the tray. My sister raised a perfectly groomed eyebrow. Separate checks at a family dinner? That's novel. I'm an entrepreneur now, I replied with forced lightness. We're very particular about our expenses. That's when my mother did it, reached across the table and placed her credit card on top of my cash, sliding it back toward me. Darling, save your pennies for your business. God knows you'll need them. The table erupted in polite laughter, as if she'd made a charming joke rather than dismissed everything I'd been pouring my soul into. My face burned as I glanced around the table, seeing nothing but amusement and pity in their eyes. Excuse me for a moment, I managed, pushing back my chair and heading for the restroom before tears could betray me. Standing in the ornate bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection. The woman looking back at me appeared exhausted but resolute. I remembered why I started this journey. The families who couldn't afford homes, the environmental impact we could mitigate, the change we could create. My family's approval had always been conditional on fitting their narrative. Maybe it was time to stop seeking it altogether. That's when my phone vibrated in my clutch. Mia's name flashed on the screen with a text that would change everything. Call me ASAP. Newman Corp just said yes. Full amount, $800K. My hands trembled as I dialed her number, locking myself in a bathroom stall for privacy. Tell me you're not joking, I whispered when she answered. Not joking, Mia practically shouted, her usual composure shattered by excitement. They love the prototype, the testing data, everything. They want to be the lead investor on our seed round, $800,000 for 20% equity. The exact terms we asked for, Alexandra. They didn't even counter. Newman Corporation was a leading green investment firm we'd pitched 3 weeks ago. Their portfolio was a who's who of successful sustainable startups. Getting their backing wasn't just about the money. It was validation from the exact people whose opinion actually mattered in our field. There's more, Mia continued, her words tumbling out. They want to issue a press release tomorrow. They're calling us the future of sustainable construction. Their PR team already drafted quotes, and they want to introduce us to their partner companies for potential collaborations. I pressed my forehead against the cool metal of the bathroom. Stall, tears finally breaking free, not from humiliation this time, but from vindication. Send me everything. I'll review it tonight. Are you okay? You sound strange. I laughed, the sound echoing in the marble bathroom. I'm at my cousin's rehearsal dinner with my entire family who just laughed about my failing business venture and covered my dinner bill because they assume I'm broke. Mia's sharp intake of breath was followed by, "Oh my God. This is like a movie moment. You have to go tell them." I considered it for a moment, marching back to the table, announcing our investment, watching their expressions shift from pity to surprise. The fantasy was tempting, but fleeting. "No," I said, suddenly certain. "I'm not going to tell them." "What? Why not?" "Because I don't need to prove anything to them anymore, Mia. This victory isn't about them. It's about us, about what we've built and why we built it." When I returned to the table, my face betrayed nothing of the seismic shift that had just occurred. I slipped into conversation about wedding details and family gossip as if my entire world hadn't just transformed. My mother patted my hand sympathetically as we left, promising to check in on me that weekend, as if I were an ailing relative, requiring care. I hugged each family member goodbye, including my cash that remained on the table, a small price to pay for the knowledge I now carried. As I watched them climb into their luxury cars, I felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time, I didn't need their approval. I didn't even want it anymore. The next morning, as the Newman Corp press release hit the industry wires, I sat cross-legged on the floor of our tiny office with Mia, sharing grocery store champagne in paper cups. My phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. Congratulatory. Messages from former colleagues, connection requests on LinkedIn, interview requests from sustainability publications. Buried among them was a text from my brother Michael. Just saw the Newman Corp announcement. Call me. We need to talk. I set the phone aside without responding and raised my cup to Mia. To believing in something before anyone else does. She clinked her cup against mine, eyes bright with triumph and possibility. To changing the world, one recycled wall panel at a time. In that moment, I realized something profound. Success doesn't always look like a corner office with a view of the city. Sometimes it looks like a cramped workspace with prototype materials stacked to the ceiling, and a single ally who believes in your vision as much as you do. And validation, real validation, doesn't come from family approval or social status. It comes from staying true to your purpose even when everyone tells you you're wrong. It comes from the quiet certainty that you're building something meaningful, regardless of who notices or understands. My journey was just beginning, but I already knew this was the first chapter of a different kind of success story, one that wouldn't fit neatly into my family's definition, but would create ripples far beyond what their limited view could imagine. I had no way of knowing then how much would change in the coming months, how our technology would evolve, how our team would grow, how our impact would expand. But sitting there with cheap champagne and expensive dreams, I knew one thing for certain. I would never again mistake my family's approval for my own worth. And that realization was worth far more than $800,000 could ever be. The day after the Newman Corp announcement changed everything, I woke up to over 30 missed calls. My entire family had seemingly discovered the news at once, creating a cascade of notifications that illuminated my phone screen like a digital firefly display. I silenced it and set it face down on my nightstand, choosing instead to focus on the day ahead, our first as a properly funded company. The validation felt surreal, but I was determined not to let it distract me from the real work that lay ahead. Mia arrived at our office an hour early, already setting up the conference room for our first official meeting with the Newman team. She'd printed out their proposal on actual paper, a luxury we'd previously avoided to save on expenses, and organized folders with our product specifications, testing data, and market research. "I bought real coffee," she announced, pointing to a French press on our makeshift kitchenette counter. "No more instant garbage. We're funded now." I laughed, appreciating how this small change symbolized our transition. Let's not get too crazy with the spending. That $800K has to last us through production scale up. Buzzkill, she teased, but I could see the same determined focus in her eyes. We both understood that while the investment was a milestone, it was just the beginning of an even more challenging climb. At noon, my phone buzzed with a text from my sister Sophia. "Mom and Dad are furious you haven't called them back. We need to talk about this company situation. Dinner at their house tonight? 7 p.m. The phrasing, "this company situation," as if EcoFrame were a problematic phase or an intervention-worthy addiction, made my jaw clench. I typed a quick response. "Can't tonight. Investor meetings all day. We'll call when I can." Her reply was immediate. "This is family, Alexandra. Make time." I set my phone aside without responding. 6 months ago, their disappointment had the power to crush me. Now it felt like background noise, still present, but no longer defining. The Newman Corp meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m., and nothing, not even my family's sudden interest in my little project, would derail my preparation. The Newman team arrived exactly on time. 4 people in sustainable fashion business where that subtly signaled both their environmental values and their financial success. Jessica Newman herself, the founder's daughter and current CEO, led the group. She was in her 50s with silver-streaked dark hair and the confident posture of someone who had never been laughed out of a family dinner. "Alexandra," she said, gripping my hand firmly, Impressive space you have here. Her eyes took in our converted warehouse with its exposed brick walls and salvaged furniture, all chosen out of necessity rather than aesthetic, but somehow working in our favor today. Minimalist and on-brand, I replied with a smile. Every piece of furniture is either second-hand or made from reclaimed materials. Jessica nodded appreciatively. Authenticity. That's what drew us to EcoFrame. You're not just talking about sustainability, you're living it. For the next 3 hours, we walked them through our business plan, demonstrated our prototypes, and outlined our production timeline. Their questions were pointed but fair, their feedback constructive. When Jessica suggested adjustments to our marketing strategy, I found myself engaging with her as an equal, something I wouldn't have had the confidence to do 6 months earlier. We want to fast-track this, Jessica said as the meeting concluded. The housing market is primed for disruption, and your technology hits the sweet spot between environmental impact and economic accessibility. How quickly can you scale production? Mia and I exchanged glances. We'd been conservative in our projections, planning for a gradual ramp-up over 18 months. With proper factory space and the right team, I ventured, we could have initial production units ready in 4 months, full scale in 9. Jessica's eyebrows raised slightly. Ambitious. I like it. We'll have our legal team draft the final papers by Friday. As they packed up to leave, Jessica paused. One more thing, Alexandra. The Seattle Sustainability Summit is next month. We'd like you to present EcoFrame as part of our innovation showcase. It's an opportunity to connect with potential partners and customers. My heart raced. The summit was the premier green technology event in the Pacific Northwest, attended by everyone who mattered in the sustainable business community. We'd be honored, I said, maintaining professional composure while mentally calculating how much work this would add to our already ambitious timeline. After they left, Mia and I collapsed onto our office couch, a worn mid-century piece I rescued from a curb and reupholstered ourselves with fabric remnants. Did that just happen? Mia asked wide-eyed. It did, I confirmed, equally stunned. We have 4 months to set up production, build a team, and prepare a presentation that will impress the entire Seattle sustainability community. And your family? Mia added quietly. I shook my head. They don't factor into this. Mia gave me a knowing look. The summit will be all over local business news. Your parents' friends will be there. You can't avoid this collision forever. She was right, of course. Seattle's business community was expansive but interconnected, particularly at the upper levels where my parents had spent decades building relationships. The worlds I had carefully kept separate were about to converge. I'll deal with that when I have to, I said finally. Right now, we need to find manufacturing space. The next week passed in a blur of productivity. With funding secured, doors that had previously been closed suddenly swung open. We toured potential factory locations, interviewed candidates for our production team, and refined our protocols for quality control. Every decision felt weightier now that actual money was involved, but also more exciting. We were building something real, something that would exist beyond spreadsheets and prototypes. Through it all, my phone continued to accumulate messages from family members. My mother's voicemails became increasingly pointed. Alexandra, this silent treatment is childish. We're trying to support you. My father's approach was more direct. Call me immediately. We need to discuss how to position this venture properly. My brother Michael was the only one who seemed genuinely interested. Impressive deal, Lexi. Let me know if you need any legal advice on the contract. 10 days after the Newman announcement, I finally relented and agreed to Sunday dinner at my parents' house. I arrived purposefully late, parking my recently purchased used Prius, a concession to practicality now that we had some funding, behind my father's Mercedes in the circular driveway. My mother opened the door before I could knock, her expression a mixture of annoyance and what appeared to be genuine concern. "Finally," she said, pulling me into a stiff hug that smelled of Chanel No. 5. "We were beginning to think you'd disappeared entirely." "Just busy," I replied, following her into the familiar grandeur of their home. Starting a company takes time. The family was gathered in the living room, my father standing by the fireplace with a scotch in hand, Sophia perched on the arm of a chair texting someone, and Michael lounging on the sofa. They all looked up as I entered, conversations pausing mid-sentence. "There she is," my father said, raising his glass slightly. "The entrepreneur of the hour." His tone was impossible to read, hovering somewhere between sarcasm and reluctant pride. I decided to take it at face value. "Thanks, Dad. It's been an exciting couple of weeks." "So we've heard," my mother said pointedly, "from the business section of the Seattle Times, of all places, not from our own daughter." I took a deep breath. I've been focused on getting everything in order. The investment accelerated our timeline considerably. 800,000, my father mused, swirling his scotch. Not bad for a first round, though Newman is known for taking substantial equity positions. What did you give up for it? 20%, I answered, accepting the glass of wine my mother handed me. Standard for a seed round in our industry. We retained full operational control. He nodded, seemingly approving of the terms despite himself. My sister finally looked up from her phone. "So this is actually happening? You're really going through with this recycled building thing?" "Eco-frame," I corrected. "And yes, we're already securing manufacturing space and hiring our production team. We'll have our first commercial units ready in 4 months." "That seems aggressive," my father commented. "It is," I agreed, "but necessary. We have competitors nipping at our heels, and Newman wants us to move quickly." My mother gestured toward the dining room. "Dinner's ready. We can continue this discussion at the table." As we settled into our usual seats, I noticed an extra place setting beside mine. "Are we expecting someone else?" I asked. My mother arranged her napkin in her lap with practiced precision. "Yes, actually. I hope you don't mind, but we invited James Harrington to join us." I nearly choked on my water. "James Harrington from Westfield Development? Why would you invite him to a family dinner?" "Because he's one of the largest residential developers in the state," my father answered smoothly. "And a personal friend who's been looking to incorporate more sustainable materials into his projects. I thought you might appreciate the introduction." The doorbell rang before I could respond. Minutes later, James Harrington, silver-haired, tan and exuding the confident air of old money, was seated beside me, examining me with undisguised curiosity. "Alexandra," he said warmly, "Richard has told me so much about your innovative company. I was intrigued when I saw the Newman announcement." "Thank you," I replied cautiously, shooting my father a look that he pretended not to notice. "We're excited about the potential impact of our technology." "As am I," James responded. "Westfield has been under pressure to improve our sustainability metrics. Perhaps we could discuss a potential partnership?" And just like that, I understood what was happening. My parents, unable to dissuade me from my chosen path, had decided to co-opt it instead, to bring it within their sphere of influence and reshape it into something they could understand and control. A proper business connection facilitated by my father would legitimize my venture in a way that my own efforts apparently couldn't. The realization should have made me angry, but instead I felt a strange sense of clarity. This was who they were, people who believed success only counted if it came through the right channels and reflected well on them. They weren't trying to hurt me. They simply couldn't conceive of achievement outside their narrow definition of it. Throughout dinner, I answered James's questions professionally while maintaining a careful distance. Yes, our materials were compatible with traditional construction methods. No, they wouldn't require special training for his crews. Yes, they would help his projects qualify for additional green building certifications. You should come tour our facility, I said as dessert was served. Once we're set up next month. Bring your engineers. They can ask technical questions that Mia would be better equipped to answer. Mia? My mother inquired. My co-founder and CTO, I explained. She's the engineering genius behind our material composition. I don't believe you've mentioned her before, my father said with a slight frown. She was my first hire, I replied. We've been working together since day one. James nodded appreciatively. I'd love to meet her. Technical expertise is crucial for innovations like yours. After James left, promising to be in touch about that facility tour, my family converged on me in the kitchen where I was helping my mother load the dishwasher, a habit from childhood I couldn't seem to break. He seemed very interested, my mother said, carefully rinsing a crystal wine glass. Your father can help you prepare a proper proposal for Westfield. It could be a significant contract. I appreciate the introduction, I said carefully, but we already have our go-to-market strategy mapped out with Newman. We're focusing on smaller, progressive builders first before approaching larger developers. My father frowned. That's backwards, Alexandra. You want to land the big fish first? Establish credibility. Actually, we need to prove our product in the field before approaching companies the size of Westfield, I countered. We're being strategic about our growth. Strategic would have been consulting with your family before making these decisions, my mother said, her voice carrying that familiar edge of disappointment. We have connections, experience. That I didn't ask for, I interrupted gently. Mom, Dad, I know you're trying to help in your way, but this is my company, mine and Mia's. We've built it from nothing, secured funding on our own terms, and we have a vision for where we're going. Sophia, who had been leaning against the counter scrolling through her phone, looked up. They're just trying to make sure you don't fail spectacularly in front of everyone they know. The blunt assessment hung in the air. My brother Michael, who had been unusually quiet all evening, finally spoke up. Or maybe they're trying to make sure that if Lexi succeeds, they can say they were part of it all along. My parents turned to him in surprise. He shrugged, unrepentant. What? We all laughed at her little project until Newman wrote a check. Now suddenly we're hosting networking dinners and offering business advice? It's transparent. That's enough, Michael, my father said sharply. But it was too late. The truth had been spoken aloud, creating a fissure in the carefully maintained family narrative. My sister looked uncomfortable. My mother busied herself with wiping down the already clean counter. My father drained his scotch and set the glass down with unnecessary force. I felt a surge of affection for my brother, who had always been the family truth-teller, even when it cost him. And something else, a growing certainty that I needed to establish clear boundaries if I wanted to protect what I was building. I should go, I said, gathering my coat and bag. Early meeting tomorrow with potential manufacturing partners. My mother looked stricken. Alexandra, don't leave like this. We're trying to be supportive. I know, I said, softening my tone. And I appreciate that you want to be involved. But supportive would have been believing in me 6 months ago when I had nothing but an idea and determination. Supportive would be respecting the business decisions I'm making now, even if they're different from what you would do. We just don't want to see you struggle unnecessarily, my father said, his voice uncharacteristically vulnerable. I know, I replied. But struggle isn't always unnecessary. Sometimes it's how we figure out who we are and what we're capable of. I hugged each of them goodbye, even Sophia, who looked surprised by the gesture. Michael walked me to my car, the night air cool against our faces. They'll come around, he said, leaning against my Prius. Or they won't. Either way, you're doing something important. When did you become the supportive one? I asked with a half smile. He shrugged. watching you walk away from everything they told us we should want. It made me question some things in my own life. My law practice is successful, but am I actually making anything better? You are. His words stayed with me during the drive back to my apartment, a modest one-bedroom I'd downgraded to when I started EcoFrame. It wasn't in the luxury building my parents had hoped I'd choose after business school. The fixtures weren't high-end. The view wasn't spectacular, but it was mine, paid for with work that meant something to me. As I got ready for bed, my phone pinged with a new email. Jessica Newman had sent over the final investment documents for review, along with a personal note. Alexandra, looking forward to introducing EcoFrame at the summit next month. We believe this technology could transform affordable housing across the country. Let's change the world together. I read it twice, letting the words sink in. Change the world together. Not make money together, or build our brands together, or any of the hollow corporate speak I'd grown accustomed to in my previous career. Actual impact. Real change. The thing my family couldn't seem to understand, but that filled me with purpose every morning when I opened my eyes. The next day, I arrived at our office to find Mia already deep in conversation with a woman I didn't recognize. She was in her early 40s, with practical short hair and the weathered hands of someone who worked with tools regularly. Alexandra, Mia called, waving me over. This is Teresa Martinez. She's the production manager I was telling you about, the one who oversaw manufacturing at Greenbuild before they were acquired. Teresa's handshake was firm, her assessment direct. Your prototype shows promise, but scaling to commercial production will require significant refinement. I have some ideas if you're interested. 3 hours later, Teresa had accepted our offer to become EcoFrame's production director, our third official employee. Her expertise was exactly what we needed, and her salary would take a substantial chunk of our funding. But it was the right investment at the right time. As we walked her out, Teresa paused. Just so you know. I turned, down 3 other offers to come here, higher-paying ones. Why choose us? I asked, genuinely curious. Because you're not just selling a product, she replied simply. You're solving a problem that needs solving. Housing affordability and environmental impact shouldn't be opposing forces. Your technology bridges that gap. That night, as I updated our organizational chart to include Teresa's position, I reflected on how much had changed in just 2 weeks. We had funding, a growing team, and increasing validation from the very industry we hoped to transform. The contrast with the family dinner couldn't have been starker. At home, I still felt like I needed to defend my choices, while in the business world, those same choices were being recognized as visionary. My phone lit up with a text from my father. Spoke with James Harrington today. He's very interested in your materials for their new development in Tacoma. Let me know when you want to discuss strategy for the proposal. I set the phone aside without responding. The boundary I needed to establish wasn't just about protecting my business decisions. It was about preserving my newfound clarity. For the first time in my life, I was measuring success by my own standards rather than theirs. I wasn't going to compromise that, even for the promise of a significant contract. EcoFrame would succeed or fail based on the foundation Mia and I had built, our vision, our technology, our strategy, and whatever the outcome, it would be authentically ours. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. We secured our manufacturing facility, a formerly abandoned warehouse in an industrial area south of Seattle that we leased for a fraction of market rate due to its condition. Teresa oversaw the installation of our production equipment while Mia refined our material formulations for commercial scale. I focused on building our brand presence and preparing for the Sustainability Summit presentation. Through it all, my family maintained a steady stream of helpful interference. My father sent introductions to potential clients with notes implying he was involved in the business. My mother forwarded articles about women entrepreneurs maintaining work-life balance, with suggestions about my appearance for upcoming public events. Sophia texted criticism disguised as concern. Just saw your website. Wouldn't a more professional design attract better clients? Only Michael maintained a respectful distance, occasionally checking in with straightforward questions about our progress and offering legal advice only when asked. The morning of the Seattle Sustainability Summit arrived with perfect Pacific Northwest weather, misty rain that made the city's greenery glisten. I dressed carefully in a sustainable fashion, outfit I'd invested in specifically for this event. Hemp blazer, organic cotton shirt, and trousers made from recycled ocean plastic. Professional, but aligned with our values. As I prepared to leave, my phone rang with my mother's ringtone. I hesitated before answering. Alexandra? Are you on your way to the summit? She sounded unusually anxious. Just heading out, I confirmed. My presentation is at 11. We'll be there, she said, catching me completely off guard. Your father and I, and Michael. Sophia had a patient emergency, but she sends her support. You're coming to the summit? I repeated, unable to keep the surprise from my voice. Of course we are, she replied, sounding almost hurt. It's your big moment. We wouldn't miss it. I ended the call feeling distinctly off balance. They were coming to support me or to observe me, to genuinely learn about my work or to evaluate how I represented the family name. Their motives were still unclear, but their presence would add another layer of complexity to an already high-pressure day. I arrived at the Seattle Convention Center 2 hours before my scheduled presentation, needing time to set up our display, materials, and center myself before facing both the sustainability community and my unexpected family audience. The summit was already buzzing with activity, exhibitors arranging their booths, speakers reviewing notes in quiet corners, attendees networking over compostable coffee cups. I spotted Jessica Newman across the main hall, deep in conversation, with the mayor of Seattle. She caught my eye and gave me an encouraging nod. Mia joined me 30 minutes later, rolling a cart containing our material samples and prototype wall section. Teresa sends her regrets, she said, helping me unpack. Production equipment delivery got rescheduled for this morning. She couldn't get away. Probably for the best, I replied, arranging our display. One fewer person to witness my potential public speaking disaster. Mia bumped my shoulder gently. Stop that. You're going to be brilliant. You know this material inside and out, and you believe in what we're doing. That's all you need. We set up our small booth in the Innovation Showcase area, modest compared to the elaborate displays of larger companies, but clean and professional. Our recycled wall panels were arranged to show various finish options, along with comparative data sheets highlighting their thermal performance, cost savings, and environmental impact metrics. A digital screen displayed a time-lapse video of our production process, courtesy of Teresa's early trial runs. As we worked, I briefed Mia on my family's impending arrival. My parents and brother are coming. I'm still not sure whether to interpret it as support or surveillance. Her eyebrows shot up. The same parents who laughed about covering your dinner bill? That's interesting timing. Indeed, I murmured, straightening our business cards for the 3rd time. Michael's genuine, at least. He's been the one pleasant surprise in all this. At 10:15, I spotted them entering the exhibition hall. My father in his trademark charcoal suit, my mother elegant in sustainable luxury wear, a recent conversion I hadn't expected, and Michael looking somewhat uncomfortable in business casual. They paused at the entrance, scanning the room. When my mother's eyes landed on our booth, her expression shifted from searching to something I couldn't quite read. A mixture of surprise and something else. Pride? Concern? It was impossible to tell from this distance. Showtime, I whispered to Mia as they approached. Try not to mention the dinner incident. My father reached us first, extending his hand formally as if I were a business associate rather than his daughter. Alexandra, impressive turnout for the summit this year. Dad, I acknowledged, accepting his handshake before turning to my mother. Mom, thank you both for coming. Of course we came, my mother said, air kissing both my cheeks. This is important. Her eyes traveled over our display, taking in the modest but professional presentation. If she was disappointed by its lack of flashiness, she hid it well. Michael gave me a genuine hug. Looking good, Lexi. This is the real deal. I introduced Mia, watching carefully as my parents interacted with her. To my surprise, my father engaged her immediately in technical questions about material composition and our values, displaying an unexpected level of homework done. My mother, meanwhile, examined our display with a critical eye that I recognized from childhood room inspections. The presentation visuals are quite minimalist, she observed. Intentionally, I replied. We're emphasizing substance over style. Our materials speak for themselves. She nodded slowly. I suppose that works for this audience. Before I could respond, Jessica Newman appeared at my elbow. Alexandra, we're adjusting the schedule slightly. You'll be presenting directly after the keynote, which means you're on at 10:45 instead of 11. I introduced Jessica to my family, watching with a strange detachment as my parents shifted into their networking mode, polished, charming, and subtly name-dropping. Jessica, to her credit, remained warmly professional, but kept the conversation brief. I need to steal Alexandra for a few minutes of prep, she said. Family support is wonderful to see. You must be very proud. As she led me away, Jessica leaned in slightly. Your parents seem intense. I laughed, despite my nerves. That's the diplomatic way to put it. Well, they raised a visionary entrepreneur, so they must have done something right, she replied with a smile. Now, are you ready to wow this crowd? The keynote address, delivered by a renowned environmental architect, concluded to enthusiastic applause at precisely 10:42. My pulse quickened as the moderator approached the podium to introduce me. The main hall was packed, with at least 300 people in attendance, including industry leaders, potential partners, competitors, and now, unexpectedly, my family, seated in the second row directly in my sightline. Our next presenter represents the kind of breakthrough innovation that could transform sustainable construction, the moderator announced. Please welcome Alexandra Hayes, founder and CEO of EcoFrame, presenting Accessibility Through Innovation, Bridging the Gap Between Sustainability and Affordability. The applause felt distant as I took the stage, adjusting the microphone and connecting my presentation to the display system. I caught my mother straightening in her seat, my father's evaluative gaze, and Michael's encouraging thumbs up. Then I looked past them to the wider audience, people who actually cared about the problem we were trying to solve, not just how the solution reflected on them personally. Thank you, I began, my voice stronger than I expected. We're facing two critical challenges in housing today: affordability and environmental impact. For too long, these have been treated as separate problems, or worse, as inherently opposing forces. Build green and costs rise. Build affordably and sustainability suffers. I clicked to the first slide, a simple graph showing the increasing gap between housing costs and average incomes alongside rising environmental impact metrics. At EcoFrame, we reject this false dichotomy. Our mission is simple but ambitious: to create building materials that are both more affordable and more sustainable than traditional options. For the next 20 minutes, I walked the audience through our innovation, the composition of our recycled materials, their thermal and structural properties, their cost advantages, and most importantly, their potential impact on both housing affordability and environmental sustainability. I shared case studies from our early trials, data from independent testing, and our roadmap for scaling production. Throughout the presentation, I found myself repeatedly making eye contact with my parents, searching their expressions for some reaction. My father maintained his business poker face, the same one he wore in board meetings and negotiations. My mother's expression was harder to read, a mixture of surprise and what might have been dawning comprehension. In conclusion, I said, approaching the end of my allotted time, EcoFrame isn't just developing a product. We're offering a new paradigm, one where sustainability becomes more accessible rather than less, where environmental responsibility enhances affordability rather than detracting from it, and where doing the right thing for the planet doesn't require financial privilege. I paused, taking in the room's energy before delivering my final thought. Because a truly sustainable future can't just be for those who can afford to opt in. It must be for everyone, or it isn't sustainable at all. Thank you. The applause was immediate and enthusiastic, more so than I had dared to hope. As I gathered my materials, the moderator returned to the microphone to open the Q&A session. The questions were thoughtful and engaged. How soon could we scale production? Had we considered applications beyond residential construction? What regulatory hurdles were we anticipating? I answered each one clearly and confidently, occasionally deferring technical specifics to Mia, who joined me on stage for this portion. What surprised me most was how natural it felt, discussing our work with people who understood its value and challenged its details in good faith. This wasn't like defending my career choice at family dinners. It was collaborative, productive dialogue about ideas that mattered. The final question came from a woman in the back row, her hand raised tentatively among more assertive audience members. The moderator acknowledged her, and she stood, her voice slightly hesitant. I work for a nonprofit that builds transitional housing for formerly homeless families, she said. Your materials sound perfect for our needs, but my question is whether a small organization like ours could actually access this technology, or if it's primarily designed for large-scale developers. It was the perfect question, one that cut straight to the heart of our mission. I stepped closer to the edge of the stage, wanting to address her directly rather than abstractly. That's precisely the kind of application we had in mind when developing EcoFrame, I replied. Our pricing model includes specific provisions for nonprofit and community-based organizations, including reduced margins and technical support for implementation. We'd love to talk with you further about your specific needs. As the session concluded and people began moving toward the exhibition floor, I lost sight of my family in the crowd. Numerous attendees approached the stage, business cards extended, questions continuing beyond the formal Q&A. Jessica Newman appeared at my side, smoothly helping to manage the sudden interest. Impressive, she murmured as we directed people toward our booth for further conversation. You've generated exactly the kind of response we hoped for. There's a journalist from Sustainable Housing Monthly who wants to interview you this afternoon. For the next 2 hours, Mia and I barely had a moment to breathe as our small booth became one of the busiest at the summit. We collected contact, information from potential partners, distributors, and customers. The nonprofit housing representative found us and scheduled a site visit for the following week. 2 architecture firms expressed interest in specifying our materials for upcoming projects. It was approaching 2 p.m. when the crowd finally thinned enough for me to notice my family waiting patiently at the edge of our booth area. My father was checking his watch, a subtle but familiar sign of his impatience. My mother was observing the interactions with an appraising eye. Michael was scrolling through his phone, but looked up when I caught his eye. Sorry for the wait, I said, approaching them. That was unexpected. It was impressive, my father said, his tone measured but sincere. Your presentation was substantive. The market response seems promising. From him, this qualified as effusive praise. My mother reached out and adjusted the collar of my blazer. a habitual gesture that used to irritate me but now felt almost comforting in its familiarity. "You were poised," she said. "Very professional. And you clearly believe in what you're doing." I searched her face for the criticism I'd grown accustomed to hearing beneath her words, but for once, there seemed to be none. Just a straightforward observation, perhaps even tinged with respect. "Thank you," I replied, unexpectedly moved by their simple acknowledgments. "It means a lot that you came." "We wanted to see it for ourselves," my father said. "What you've built." There was an awkward pause as 30 years of family dynamics hovered between us. Their expectations, my rebellion against them, their disappointment, my determination to prove them wrong. And now, this tentative moment of connection across the divide. Michael broke the tension, glancing at his watch. "I hate to interrupt the family moment, but I thought we were taking Alexandra to a celebration lunch. I'm starving, and she just killed it up there." My mother brightened. "Yes, we have reservations at Canlis at 2:30. Our treat, of course." Canlis was Seattle's most prestigious restaurant, the kind of place my family considered appropriate for major celebrations. The gesture was meaningful, even if tinged with their usual preference for exclusivity and status. For a moment, I was tempted to accept, to bask in this rare moment of parental approval, and enjoy a meal I certainly couldn't afford on my startup budget. Then I glanced back at our booth, where Mia was still engaged with a potential partner, and at the summit around us, still buzzing with the energy of innovation and purpose. This was where the real work was happening, not in the rarefied air of a high-end restaurant, but here among people trying to solve real problems. "That's really thoughtful," I said carefully, "but I can't leave now. We have meetings scheduled all afternoon, including a press interview and several potential client discussions. Mia and I need to be here." I saw the flicker of disappointment cross my mother's face, the slight hardening of my father's expression, old patterns reasserting themselves, their assumption that I would prioritize their gesture over my work, my refusal to do so, their interpretation of that refusal as rejection rather than commitment. "You can't spare 2 hours for lunch?" my mother asked, her tone slipping back into familiar territory. "After all the effort we made to be here?" I took a deep breath, choosing my next words carefully. "I appreciate you coming today. It means more than you know. But this isn't just a performance I put on. It's my actual work, and today is crucial for our company's future. I need to be here." "Perhaps we could reschedule," my father suggested stiffly, "for a time when you're less occupied." "I'd like that," I said sincerely. "Maybe next week? I can come to the house, or we could meet somewhere more casual." Michael, ever the peacemaker when he wanted to be, stepped in. "Perfect. I'll coordinate the details. Maybe we could even tour your facility when it's up and running." "I'd love to see it." My father nodded curtly, professional mask firmly back in place. "That sounds acceptable. We'll be in touch." As they turned to leave, my mother hesitated, then surprised me by reaching out to squeeze my hand. "You were very compelling up there," she said quietly. "I didn't fully understand what you were doing until today." It wasn't an apology for the doubt, the mockery, the dismissal of my choices. But it was something, an acknowledgement, perhaps even the beginning of acceptance. I squeezed her hand in return, a silent thank you for the small olive branch. After they left, I rejoined Mia at our booth, feeling emotionally drained but professionally energized. "Family duty discharged," I said, taking a sip from my long cold coffee. "What did I miss?" "Only 3 more potential customers and 1 possible investor," she replied with a grin. "Nothing major." I laughed, the tension of the family encounter dissipating. Just a typical Thursday then. The rest of the summit was a whirlwind of connections, conversations, and opportunities. By the time we packed up our booth at 6 p.m., we had collected over 40 solid leads, scheduled 5 facility tours for potential partners, and gained commitments from 2 architecture firms to specify our materials in upcoming projects. The journalist's interview had gone well, with a feature article promised for next month's issue. As we loaded the last of our materials into Mia's car, Jessica Newman approached with 2 other members of her team. "Dinner," she announced rather than asked. "You 2 have earned it, and we have details to discuss about next steps." We ended up at a small farm-to-table restaurant in Capitol Hill. Unpretentious but excellent. Exactly the kind of place I now preferred over the stuffy establishments my parents favored. Over locally sourced food and Washington wine, we discussed expanded production timelines, marketing strategies, and potential partnership opportunities that had emerged from the summit. "You've positioned yourselves perfectly," Jessica observed, sipping her wine. "The affordable housing angle gives you purpose beyond profit, and the sustainability metrics give you credibility with the environmental community. It's a powerful combination." The response today was beyond what we anticipated, I admitted, especially from the nonprofit sector. "That doesn't surprise me," said David, Newman Corp's sustainability director. "They've been squeezed by rising construction costs and limited by traditional building approaches. You're offering a viable alternative that aligns with their values and their budgets." As dinner progressed, the conversation shifted from business to more personal reflections. Jessica, I learned, had faced her own challenges when taking over Newman Corp from her father, transforming it from a traditional investment firm to one focused on environmental innovation. "He thought I was throwing away a perfectly good business model to chase idealistic dreams," she said with a rueful smile. "It took 3 years of consistent returns to convince him that purpose and profit aren't mutually exclusive." "Did he ever fully come around?" I asked, thinking of my own parents' tentative steps toward understanding my choices. "Yes and no," she replied thoughtfully. "He acknowledges the success, but still doesn't fully grasp the why of it all. I've learned that's okay. I don't need his complete understanding, just his respect for the results." Her words resonated deeply. Perhaps I had been seeking the wrong thing from my family, not just their approval or acceptance, but their full understanding of my vision. But understanding required shared values, and those had diverged long ago. Respect, however, might still be possible, especially if backed by measurable success. By the time dinner concluded, it was nearly 10 p.m. Mia headed home to her apartment, while I opted to walk part of the way to mine, needing time to process the day's events. The Seattle night was clear for once, stars visible between the skyscrapers, the air crisp with early autumn. As I walked, my phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Proud of you today, Lexi. Mom and Dad are too, even if they don't know how to say it. This is all new territory for them." I smiled, appreciating his perspective and his effort to bridge the family divide. New territory indeed, for all of us. Me, building something meaningful rather than prestigious. Them, confronting the possibility that success could look different than they had always defined it. My phone buzzed again, this time with an email notification. I paused under a streetlight to read it, surprised to see it was from the woman who had asked about transitional housing during my presentation. "Ms. Hayes, thank you for your response to my question today and for taking time to speak with me afterward. As I mentioned, Horizon Housing provides transitional homes for families recovering from homelessness. We're currently planning a 24-unit development that has been stalled due to rising material costs. Based on your presentation and our conversation, I believe eco-frame materials could make this project viable again. I've attached our plans and would welcome your input on how your technology could be incorporated. This could mean homes for 24 families currently in temporary shelters. Thank you for creating a solution that organizations like ours can actually access." I read the email twice, emotion welling unexpectedly. This was why I had walked away from my prestigious career, endured my family's disapproval, worked 18-hour days in a converted bedroom office. Not for an investment round or industry accolades, but for the tangible impact our work could have on real lives. I continued my walk home with renewed purpose, mentally drafting our response and calculating how we could make this project work within the nonprofit's budget constraints. 24 families, real people who needed homes they could afford. It was both humbling and energizing to realize that our materials could help make that happen. When I reached my apartment building, I paused on the threshold, struck by a sudden awareness of the journey that had brought me here. 6 months ago, I had been questioning every choice I'd made, wounded by my family's mockery, uncertain if my vision would ever materialize into something viable. Now, standing on the precipice of actual impact, those doubts seemed distant. Not gone entirely, but diminished by the growing evidence that I had chosen the right path after all. The day had been a milestone, not just professionally, but personally. My family had witnessed what I was building. The sustainability community had embraced our innovation. Potential partners and customers had validated our approach. And most importantly, I had seen for myself the real-world applications of our work, the problems we could help solve, the people we could help house, the change we could help create. As I unlocked my door, my phone buzzed one final time. A text from an unknown number. "This is Teresa. Production line is officially installed. We're ready to start trial runs tomorrow. Thought you'd want to know." I smiled, typing back a quick response. "Best news to end a big day. See you at 7 a.m. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: scaling production, fulfilling commitments, navigating the complex relationships with both my investors and my family. But tonight, I allowed myself to simply feel the satisfaction of purpose aligned with work, of vision becoming reality, of values translated into action. The modest apartment I had once seen as a symbol of my downgrade from corporate success now felt like exactly what it was: a conscious choice that reflected my priorities, a stepping stone on a path I had chosen with intention rather than inherited through expectation. As I prepared for bed, mentally reviewing the day's connections and opportunities, I realized that something fundamental had shifted. I no longer needed my family to understand my choices to believe in them myself. Their approval, while still emotionally significant, was no longer the validation I sought most urgently. My compass had been recalibrated to something more enduring: the knowledge that what we were building mattered, that it solved real problems for real people, that it aligned with my deepest values in ways my previous career never had. Jessica's words from dinner echoed in my mind: "Purpose and profit aren't mutually exclusive." Perhaps that was the lesson my family needed to learn, and that I needed to demonstrate through consistent results rather than persuasive arguments. Actions over words. Impact over explanation. With that thought, I set my alarm for 5:30 a.m., knowing tomorrow would require all my energy and focus. The Sustainability Summit had been a triumph, but it was just one milestone in a much longer journey. The real work was only beginning. The first production run of eco-frame panels emerged from our manufacturing line exactly 4 months after the Newman investment. I stood beside Teresa on the factory floor, watching as the finished product, sleek, sturdy wall panels made from 85% recycled materials, moved along the conveyor belt for quality inspection. Each panel represented countless hours of refinement, testing, and determination. They weren't just building materials, they were physical manifestations of our vision. "They're perfect," I said, running my hand along the surface of a finished panel. The texture was slightly different from traditional drywall, more nuanced, with tiny flecks of color from the recycled components visible upon close inspection. Teresa nodded, professional satisfaction evident in her expression. "Better than perfect. They're exceeding the thermal performance metrics from our prototype by nearly 15%. The modified compression technique is paying off." In the months since the Sustainability Summit, our team had grown from 3 to 17 employees. The factory space, once cavernous and empty, now hummed with purposeful activity. Engineers fine-tuned production processes. Quality control specialists conducted rigorous testing protocols. Marketing and sales team members coordinated with our first wave of customers. It was a real company now, not just an idea or a prototype in a converted bedroom. That evening, we hosted a small celebration for our team. Pizza and local beer in the factory break room. Nothing extravagant, but meaningful nonetheless. I looked around at the faces of the people who had joined our mission. Some experienced, professionals who had taken pay cuts to be part of something meaningful. Others young idealists burning with passion for sustainable innovation. All of them had taken a chance on EcoFrame when it was still more promise than proof. Tomorrow, the first shipment goes out to Horizon Housing, I announced, raising my paper cup in a toast. 24 families will soon have homes built with our materials. That's not just a business milestone, it's why we're here. To the team that made it possible. The cheer that went up wasn't just workplace politeness, it carried genuine emotion. Everyone in that room understood that our success wasn't measured solely in profit margins or production quotas, but in the tangible impact our products would have on both environmental sustainability and human lives. After the celebration wound down, I found myself alone in my office, a modest glass-walled space at the edge of the factory floor rather than a corner office in a downtown tower. The contrast with my previous corporate life couldn't have been starker. My old office had featured skyline views and expensive art. This one overlooked production equipment and was furnished with second-hand pieces we'd refurbished. Yet it felt infinitely more satisfying. My phone rang, interrupting my reflection. The screen displayed my father's name, still an unusual enough occurrence to give me pause. In the months since the summit, our communication had settled into a new pattern. Polite, cautiously supportive, but still maintaining a careful distance on both sides. The deeper reconciliation I might have once craved remained elusive, perhaps impossible given our fundamentally different values. But we had found a livable middle ground. "Dad," I answered, swiveling to face the window. "Everything okay?" "Alexandra," he replied, his tone professional but not cold. "I saw the press release about your first production run. Congratulations." "Thank you," I said, genuinely appreciative of the acknowledgement. "It's been an intense few months, but we're on schedule, and the product is performing beyond expectations." "Good." A pause. "Your mother and I were wondering if the offer still stands, to tour the facility, perhaps this weekend if you're available." I blinked in surprise. They had not mentioned the facility tour since the summit, and I had assumed the idea had been forgotten or dismissed. "Of course. Saturday morning would work well. The production line will be running so you can see everything in action." "Saturday then. 10 o'clock? Perfect. I'll send you the address and parking information." After we hung up, I sat contemplating this unexpected development. Their interest seemed genuine, not merely performative now that EcoFrame had proven viable. Perhaps success was a language they could understand, even if our definitions of it differed. The door to my office opened and Mia appeared, tablet in hand. "The final numbers from QC are in. We're good to ship tomorrow." I nodded, pushing thoughts of my family aside to focus on the immediate priority. "Any issues we should know about?" "Nothing major. A few panels with minor cosmetic variations, but well within acceptable parameters. The structural integrity and insulation values are consistent across the batch." "What about the custom cuts for Horizon? Did those work with the adjustments they requested?" Mia smiled. "Perfectly. Their project manager is thrilled, says it's going to accelerate their construction timeline by at least 2 weeks. The Horizon Housing project had become something of a showcase for us, a demonstration of both the practical advantages of our materials and our commitment to accessibility. We had worked closely with their team to customize our panels for their specific design, offered pricing that stretched our margins thin but remained sustainable, and provided technical support far beyond what a typical supplier would offer. It wasn't charity. It was investment in proof of concept and alignment with our mission. Saturday morning arrived with typical Seattle autumn weather, a light drizzle that seemed to politely apologize for its intrusion. I arrived at the factory an hour before my parents' scheduled visit, walking the production floor with Teresa to ensure everything was in optimal condition. Not that it mattered from an operational standpoint, but I couldn't help wanting to present our achievement in its best light. "Nervous?" Teresa asked, noticing my repeated adjustments to an already perfectly arranged display of material samples. "That obvious?" She shrugged. "You've faced down skeptical investors and demanding customers without breaking a sweat. But your parents visit, and suddenly you're micromanaging display arrangements." I laughed, acknowledging the truth in her observation. Complex family dynamics. They've come around somewhat, but there's still this feeling that they're evaluating rather than simply supporting. "Parents," Teresa nodded sagely. "Mine still introduce me as their daughter, who works in a factory, like I'm operating a sewing machine in the 1920s instead of directing advanced manufacturing operations." At precisely 10 a.m., the security system announced visitors at the main entrance. I walked through the administrative area to greet my parents, surprised to see that Michael had joined them as well. "Hope you don't mind the addition," Michael said, giving me a quick hug. "I wanted to see this place for myself." "The more the merrier," I replied, genuinely pleased by his presence. He had become something of an ally in recent months, occasionally acting as translator between my world and our parents. My father was dressed casually by his standards. No suit, but still wearing a button-down shirt and polished shoes despite the factory setting. My mother had opted for understated elegance, as always, though I noticed her typically impeccable hair was partially hidden beneath a silk scarf, a concession to the light rain and factory conditions. "Thank you for having us," my father said formally, as if arriving for a business meeting rather than a family visit. "I'm glad you wanted to come," I replied, equally careful. We were still finding our way in this new dynamic. Professional respect, gradually replacing the disappointment and defensiveness that had characterized our earlier interactions. The tour began in the administrative area, where I introduced them to our small but growing team. My father showed particular interest in our financial operations, asking pointed but fair questions about cost structures and revenue projections. My mother observed the workspace design, commenting favorably on the sustainable materials we'd used in our own offices as a showcase of our values. When we moved to the factory floor, I watched their expressions carefully. The noise level increased considerably, with machinery humming and workers calling information across the space. It was organized chaos, purposeful and efficient, but a far cry from the hushed corporate environments they associated with success. "This is our production line," I explained, raising my voice slightly to be heard over the ambient noise. "We're running at about 60% capacity currently, with plans to scale up as demand increases." My father studied the operation with genuine interest, occasionally nodding as he followed the process from raw material preparation through compression, molding, curing, and finishing. My mother appeared slightly less comfortable with the industrial setting, but maintained polite interest. "These are the recycled components," I continued, indicating large sorting bins containing processed plastic, paper, and agricultural waste. "We've developed proprietary formulations for different applications: structural panels, insulation, finishing materials, each with specific performance characteristics." "The integration is impressive," my father acknowledged, watching as the materials moved through the initial processing stage. "How consistent is the supply chain for these recycled components?" It was exactly the kind of practical question he would ask, focused on operational stability rather than environmental impact. "We've secured long-term contracts with 3 major recycling processors and 2 agricultural cooperatives." Supply consistency was one of our primary concerns during scaling. Michael, who had been quietly observing until now, pointed toward the quality control station. What's happening there? Each panel undergoes multiple inspection points, I explained, leading them toward the QC area. Physical integrity, dimensional precision, thermal performance, and environmental safety testing. Our rejection rate is under 2%, which is exceptional for new production. I introduced them to our quality control manager, Darius, who walked them through the testing protocols with evident pride in our standards. My father engaged him in detailed questions about quality metrics and tolerances, displaying genuine interest in the technical aspects of our operation. The tour concluded in our product demonstration room, where complete wall sections showed various applications of our materials in residential construction. Here, the benefits became tangible even to non-technical observers: the weight difference. Compared to traditional materials, the superior insulation performance, the aesthetic options that didn't require additional environmental impact. These are being installed in actual homes now? My mother asked, running her hand along a finished wall section. Yes, I replied, unable to keep the pride from my voice. Our first major installation is underway at the Horizon Housing Project, Transitional. Homes for families coming out of homelessness. 24 units that will be approximately 22% less expensive to build and 35% more energy efficient to operate because of our materials. That's... She paused, seeming to search for the right word. That's meaningful work, Alexandra. Coming from her, it was a significant acknowledgement. Not impressive or successful by traditional metrics, but meaningful. Recognition of the purpose that drove our innovation. My father, who had been examining the technical specifications displayed beside each sample, turned to me with an unexpected question. How can I help? I blinked in surprise. Help? Yes, he said, matter-of-factly. You've built something impressive here, not just technically viable, but addressing a real need. My expertise is in business development and strategic partnerships. If that would be useful to you, I'd like to offer my assistance. The offer caught me completely off guard, not because he lacked relevant skills. He was, after all, a highly successful business strategist, but because it represented a fundamental shift in our relationship. No longer was he trying to redirect my path or supplement my lacking business acumen. He was offering to support the direction I had chosen, on my terms. I would appreciate that, I said carefully. We're entering a growth phase that will require expanded partnerships. Your experience would be valuable. He nodded, clearly pleased. Good. Send me your current partnership strategy and market segmentation analysis. I'll review and provide feedback. Just like that. Professional, straightforward, without emotional complexity. Yet beneath the business-like exchange lay something profound: respect. He was acknowledging my leadership while offering support rather than attempting to take control. As we concluded the tour in my office, my mother surprised me further. We're hosting a sustainability roundtable next month through the foundation, she said, referring to the family charitable foundation she chaired. Business leaders committed to environmental innovation. We'd like you to present EcoFrame, particularly the affordability aspect, which aligns with the foundation's housing access initiatives. Again, I found myself momentarily speechless. The Family Foundation had always focused on traditional, philanthropic activities, arts patronage, education scholarships, community development. Environmental sustainability and affordable housing represented new directions, suspiciously aligned with my current work. That would be wonderful, I managed. Thank you for thinking of us. It makes perfect sense, she replied with a slight wave of her hand, as if the connection were entirely obvious and not a significant shift in the foundation's focus. The intersection of sustainability and accessibility is precisely what the roundtable aims to explore. After they left, Michael lingering briefly to express genuine enthusiasm for what he'd seen, I sat in my office trying to process what had just occurred. Their interest seemed authentic, their offers of support sincere. But something about it still felt unsettled, as if pieces of a puzzle weren't quite aligning. Later that evening, as I recounted the visit to Mia over dinner at our favorite local restaurant, she provided the perspective I had been struggling to articulate. "They can't join you where you are," she said, twirling pasta thoughtfully. "So they're trying to build a bridge from where they stand." "What do you mean?" "Your parents operate from a very specific worldview, success defined by traditional metrics, influence measured in social and economic capital, value assigned according to established hierarchies. You've stepped outside that framework entirely." I nodded, following her reasoning. "They can't fully embrace your values without questioning their own," she continued. "That's too destabilizing. So instead, they're finding ways to connect your work to their existing framework, business strategy, foundation initiatives, professional networks. It lets them support you without having to fundamentally change their perspective." Her analysis resonated deeply. My parents were extending olive branches in the only way they knew how, through the familiar territories of business strategy and philanthropic positioning. They couldn't quite meet me in my purpose-driven approach to business, but they were, finding adjacent ground where our different worlds could connect. "So, what do I do with that?" I asked, genuinely uncertain. Part of me still longed for deeper understanding, for them to recognize the values that drove me, not just the success, metrics they could relate to. Mia shrugged. "Accept what they can offer without expecting what they can't give. Use your father's business development expertise if it's helpful. Present at your mother's foundation event if it advances your mission. But keep building EcoFrame, according to your vision, not theirs." Her pragmatic approach made sense. Perfect understanding might be unattainable, but practical collaboration was within reach, and ultimately more useful to our goals. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of activity as production ramped up to meet growing demand. The Horizon housing installation progressed smoothly, generating positive feedback that rippled through the affordable housing community. 2 additional nonprofit developers reached out for quotes on upcoming projects. A mid-sized regional homebuilder signed a contract to use our materials in their new eco-conscious subdivision. Through it all, I maintained regular contact with my father, sending him partnership opportunities to review and considering his strategic advice, which was genuinely valuable despite coming from a different philosophical perspective. His business instincts were sharp, even if his underlying motivations sometimes differed from mine. One Wednesday afternoon, as I was reviewing production schedules with Teresa, my phone rang with Mia's name displayed. "You need to see this," she said without preamble. "Westfield Development just announced a new, sustainable, affordable housing initiative using recycled materials that sound suspiciously like ours. Except they're not ours." My stomach tightened. Westfield, the company owned by James Harrington, the developer my parents had introduced me to months earlier during that uncomfortable family dinner. The one who had expressed interest in our materials. "Send me the press release," I replied, already moving toward my computer. The announcement was carefully worded, never explicitly claiming to have developed the technology themselves, but certainly implying it through phrases like Westfield's innovative approach to sustainable materials and our commitment to developing eco-friendly solutions. The technical specifications described sounded remarkably similar to our own proprietary formulations, though with small variations that might be enough to avoid direct patent infringement. I immediately called our attorney, forwarding the press release for her review. Then I texted my father. "Did you know about Westfield's announcement?" His response came quickly. "Just saw it. Calling James now." This isn't right. I appreciated his immediate support but remained uneasy. The timing was too coincidental, the technical details too familiar. Somewhere along the line, our proprietary information had leaked. The question was how. By late afternoon, a more complete picture had emerged. Our attorney's preliminary assessment was concerning. Westfield appeared to have developed a material that functioned similarly to ours but used a slightly different compression technique and binding agent. Close enough to compete directly with our product, different enough to potentially circumvent patent protection. My father called as I was leaving the office. I spoke with James. He claims their R&D department has been working on recycled building materials for over a year. That's convenient timing, I replied, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Alexandra, I want to be clear. I shared no technical details about your materials with him or anyone else at Westfield. Not during the dinner, not afterward. I wanted to believe him, but doubt lingered. Did you discuss our general approach? The concept of using post-consumer waste as structural material? A slight pause. In broad terms, yes. It was a dinner conversation, not a technical disclosure, but nothing proprietary. Even general concepts could provide direction for a well-funded R&D department looking to enter the sustainable materials market. Whether intentional or not, my father's networking dinner had potentially created our first major competitive threat. I'm going to make this right, he continued, determination evident in his voice. I've already called 3 contacts who sit on boards with James. They're going to express concern about the ethical implications of what appears to be a copycat product. It won't stop them legally, but it will create reputation pressure. His response surprised me, not just the immediate action, but the protective stance. For perhaps the first time, he was using his considerable influence network to support my vision rather than redirect it. Thank you, I said, meaning it despite my lingering concerns. Our attorney is reviewing options. In the meantime, we need to accelerate our market penetration before they can establish themselves. Send me your current distribution strategy, he replied without hesitation. I have some thoughts on rapid expansion channels. That night, I called an emergency leadership meeting at the office. Our small executive team, Mia, Teresa, our recently hired head of business development, and myself, gathered around the conference table, determination replacing the initial shock and anger. Westfield has resources we can't match, I acknowledged, laying out what we knew about their announcement. But we have several advantages they don't. I outlined our counter-strategic, developed with input from both our team and my father's suggestions. Accelerating production schedules, prioritizing high-visibility projects that would showcase our materials' performance, leveraging our authentic commitment to accessibility through continued partnerships with nonprofit developers, and most importantly, emphasizing our position as the original innovators rather than corporate opportunists. This isn't just a business threat, Mia pointed out. It's an opportunity to clarify what makes EcoFrame different, not just our materials, but our mission. Teresa nodded in agreement. Westfield is entering this space for market share. We're here to solve actual problems. That distinction matters, especially to the customer segments most aligned with our values. By midnight, we had developed a comprehensive response plan. Not just defensive measures to protect our market position, but proactive steps to strengthen our authentic connection to the communities we aim to serve. Whatever Westfield's intentions, their entrance into our space had galvanized our team and clarified our purpose. As I drove home in the early morning hours, exhausted but focused, I reflected on the unexpected turns my journey had taken. 6 months ago, my greatest concern had been family disapproval and financial survival. Now, I was facing corporate competition and potential intellectual property battles while simultaneously navigating a complex new relationship with my parents, one where they were both supportive allies and possible, if unintentional, sources of competitive vulnerability. The irony wasn't lost on me. My family had initially dismissed my venture as insignificant. Now it was significant enough to attract the attention of major developers, possibly through the very connections my parents had facilitated in their attempts to help in the only way they knew how. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. Meeting with Peterson Group tomorrow, 2 p.m. They're interested in exclusive builder contract for eco-conscious development community. 200+ units. Can you make it? The Peterson Group was one of the most respected regional developers, known for innovation and quality. An exclusive contract would be a game-changer for EcoFrame, not just financially, but as a credibility statement, to counter Westfield's entry into our market. I'll be there, I texted back. The game was changing, the stakes rising. My little startup was suddenly playing in much bigger arenas than I had anticipated at this stage. The challenge was maintaining our core mission amid the growing competitive pressures and expanding opportunities. Success now meant more than simply proving my family wrong or validating my career choice. It meant protecting an innovation that could genuinely impact housing accessibility and environmental sustainability. As I reached my apartment and prepared for the few hours of sleep I could manage before tomorrow's challenges, I felt a strange sense of gratitude for this new obstacle. Westfield's competitive threat had crystallized something important. EcoFrame wasn't just my personal redemption narrative or a reaction to family expectations anymore. It had become something larger, a company with a mission worth fighting for, regardless of how or why the fight had come. 8 months after our first production run, I stood in the center of a completed home at the Horizon Housing Development, watching as Maria Delgado and her 2 children received their keys. The family had been living in a shelter for 11 months after losing their apartment to rising rents. Now they were homeowners through Horizon's innovative equity building program. Their new house built with EcoFrame materials that would reduce their energy bills by nearly 40% compared to traditional construction. It's beautiful, Maria whispered, running her hand along the wall that separated the living room from the kitchen. And it's ours. Her 10-year-old daughter was already racing from room to room, claiming spaces and planning decorations. Her teenage son stood quietly beside her, trying to maintain cool detachment, but unable to hide the relief in his eyes. They were home. Finally, permanently home. The Horizon project director caught my eye across the room and gave me a subtle nod that conveyed everything. This is why we do what we do. This matters. I nodded back, swallowing the lump in my throat. In the month since Westfield had entered our market with their copycat materials, EcoFrame had been in a constant state of strategic response, accelerating innovation, strengthening partnerships, defending our position as the authentic pioneers in sustainable, affordable building solutions. The work had been exhausting, sometimes overwhelming. But moments like this one with the Delgado family recalibrated everything, reminding me why the fight was worth it. My phone vibrated in my pocket, probably Mia texting about our upcoming meeting with the patent attorney. Our legal team had identified enough unique elements in our manufacturing process to file for additional protections, creating barriers to competitors who might try to replicate our success. The process was expensive and time-consuming, but necessary in the increasingly competitive landscape. But the notification wasn't from Mia. It was from my father. Deal is final. Peterson Group just signed exclusive 3-year contract. Congratulations. I smiled, allowing myself a moment of pure satisfaction. The Peterson contract had been in negotiation for months, a massive deal that would put EcoFrame materials in over 200 homes in their new eco-conscious community. The exclusivity clause was particularly valuable, preventing Westfield or other competitors from getting their materials into what would become a flagship sustainable development in the WOW region. My father had been instrumental in securing the deal, leveraging his decades-long relationship with Peterson's founder to get us in the door when Westfield was making aggressive counteroffers. It was the kind of assistance only he could provide, opening doors that would have remained closed to us despite the quality of our product. The evolution of our relationship over the past year still surprised me sometimes. We hadn't magically resolved our different worldviews or values, but we'd found productive common ground. He respected my leadership of EcoFrame while offering strategic support that never crossed into control. I valued his business acumen while maintaining our mission-driven approach. It wasn't perfect, but it was functional in a way I wouldn't have thought possible when I first left the corporate world. Ms. Hayes? Maria's voice pulled me from my thoughts. Would you sign our wall? The project manager said it was okay. She held out a marker, gesturing toward an unfinished section of EcoFrame panel in what would become her son's bedroom. Other signatures were already there. The construction crew, the Horizon team, fellow families in the development. I'd be honored, I said, taking the marker and kneeling beside the wall. I thought carefully about what to write, understanding the significance of leaving words in a home that represented so much hope and new beginning. Finally, I wrote, "Walls build houses, people build homes. Wishing your family joy in both. Alexandra Hayes, EcoFrame." As I left the development that afternoon, I received a call from Jessica Newman. Our relationship with Newman Corp had deepened over the months, evolving from simply investor-investee to genuine strategic partnership. Jessica had become something of a mentor as I navigated the challenges of scaling a mission-driven company in an increasingly competitive market. "I just heard about the Peterson contract," she said when I answered. "That's a major win, especially with Westfield circling like sharks." "We're relieved," I admitted, getting into my car. "It gives us breathing room to focus on the next phase of growth." "Perfect timing for our conversation, then," she replied. "The board met this morning. We'd like to lead your Series A round. $20 million, contingent on bringing in matching funds from aligned investors." I nearly dropped the phone. Series A funding had been on our roadmap, but we hadn't planned to begin raising until next quarter. And $20 million was significantly more than we had projected for Newman's participation. "That's substantial," I managed to say. Jessica laughed. "Your capacity for understatement remains impressive, Alexandra. Yes, it's substantial. It's also necessary if you're going to scale fast enough to maintain your first-mover advantage against better-capitalized competitors." She wasn't wrong. Westfield had deep pockets and established distribution channels. Our only advantages were superior materials, authentic mission, and speed to market, all of which required capital to maximize. "The term sheet will be in your inbox within the hour," Jessica continued. "One thing to note, we've included a specific allocation for your nonprofit housing partnerships." The board was impressed with the impact metrics from Horizon. "We want to ensure that remains central to your growth strategy, not a side project that gets overshadowed by commercial success." Her words resonated deeply. The tension between mission and market had been a consistent theme in our strategic discussions. How to grow rapidly enough to thrive commercially while staying true to our founding purpose of making sustainable housing more accessible, not less. "That aligns perfectly with our priorities," I said, genuine gratitude in my voice. "Thank you for understanding what drives EcoFrame." "We invest in people as much as products, Alexandra. You've proven that your values aren't just marketing, they're operational principles. That's worth backing substantially." After hanging up, I sat in my parked car for several minutes, processing the implications of Newman's offer. $20 million in lead investment would fundamentally transform EcoFrame's trajectory. We could expand production capacity, accelerate R&D on next-generation materials, strengthen our nonprofit partnerships, and build the team needed to compete at national scale. It also meant a new level of scrutiny, pressure, and expectations. The stakes were rising with each success. I drove straight to the office despite the late hour, needing to share the news with Mia and begin preparing for the whirlwind that would follow. EcoFrame's headquarters had expanded from our original factory location to include adjacent office space. now housing a team of 35 full-time employees plus contractors. The contrast with our converted bedroom beginnings was striking. Mia was still working, as I expected. Her commitment matched my own. Her technical brilliance matched only by her passion for our mission. She looked up as I entered her office, immediately reading the expression on my face. "What happened?" she asked, setting aside the material samples she'd been examining. "Newman wants to lead our Series A, 20 million, contingent on matching funds." Her eyes widened. "That's double what we projected in the funding model." "And months ahead of schedule," I added, dropping into the chair across from her desk. "Jessica's sending the term sheet tonight." "This changes everything," Mia said quietly, the implications unfolding in her mind as they had in mine. "Production capacity, market expansion, R&D acceleration." "And maintaining our nonprofit partnerships," I added. "Jessica specifically mentioned they're including allocation for that work. It's part of what they're investing in, not just a corporate social responsibility sidebar." Mia nodded, understanding the significance. "So our mission remains intact, even as we scale. That's crucial." We spent the next 3 hours outlining what this investment would mean for EcoFrame, the opportunities it created and the challenges it would bring. By the time we finished, it was nearly midnight, but we had the beginnings of a strategic framework for managing this next phase of growth. As I finally headed home, exhausted but energized, I realized I needed to share the news with one more person. I called my father despite the late hour, knowing he would still be awake. "Alexandra," he answered on the second ring. "Everything all right?" "Better than all right," I replied. "Newman Corp is leading our Series A round, 20 million with matching funds to be raised." A brief silence then. "That's significant validation. Congratulations." "Thank you, and thank you for your help with Peterson. The timing of closing that deal couldn't have been better for positioning us for this round." "Glad I could contribute," he said, and I could hear the genuine satisfaction in his voice. Not the controlling pride of earlier times, but something more respectful. Pleasure in having provided useful support to a venture I led. "I'd like to discuss strategies for approaching matching investors," I continued. "Your experience would be valuable if you're willing to advise." "Of course. Come for dinner this weekend. Your mother would love to see you, and we can talk business afterward." The invitation felt natural in a way it wouldn't have a year ago. The boundaries were clearer now, the expectations adjusted on both sides. I could accept his business expertise without surrendering my autonomy. He could offer guidance without attempting to dictate my path. "I'll be there. Saturday at 7? "Perfect." That weekend dinner marked the beginning of the most intense 4 months of my professional life. Raising matching funds for our Series A became a full-time job alongside running the growing company. We met with dozens of potential investors, refined our pitch continuously, and navigated the complex dynamics of bringing new stakeholders into our mission-driven approach. My father's network and strategic advice proved invaluable, opening doors to investors who aligned with our values while also bringing substantial capital to the table. My mother, to my ongoing surprise, leveraged her foundation connections to arrange presentations to impact investors focused on sustainable housing. Michael provided legal guidance on term sheets and shareholder agreements. Their support wasn't perfect or uncomplicated. My father still occasionally suggested approaches that prioritized growth over mission in ways I couldn't accept. My mother's networking efforts sometimes came with subtle pressure to present EcoFrame in ways that aligned with her foundation's image rather than our authentic voice. But the underlying dynamics had shifted fundamentally. They were supporting the company I had built on my terms, not trying to reshape it into something that fit their predefined notion of success. 60 days into our fundraising efforts, we had secured commitments for 18 of the 20 million in matching funds. The momentum was building, with each new investor bringing additional credibility to our next conversation. EcoFrame was no longer an upstart with a promising prototype. We were an established innovator with proven market impact and a clear growth trajectory. Then came the call that would put everything into perspective. I was leaving a promising meeting with a sustainably focused investment fund when my phone rang with Teresa's number. "We have a situation," she said without preamble. "The Westfield project in Tacoma is having serious issues with their panels, water infiltration, structural integrity concerns. They've halted construction and pulled their materials from 3 other active sites." My stomach tightened. Westfield had rushed their copycat product to market, cutting corners on our meticulously developed processes in their hurry to compete. Now those shortcuts were becoming apparent. "How bad is it?" I asked, already calculating the potential. "Industry fallout. Bad enough that the city inspector has ordered testing of all installed panels. There's talk of a full recall." The implications were immediate and far-reaching. If Westfield's failures created market skepticism about recycled building materials generally, EcoFrame could suffer despite our superior product and rigorous quality standards. Years of careful work building confidence in sustainable alternatives could be undermined by one high-profile failure. "We need to get ahead of this," I said, mind racing through potential responses. "Call an emergency leadership meeting in an hour. I'll be there." The next 48 hours were a blur of strategic decisions and rapid implementation. We issued a clear statement differentiating our materials and quality processes from competitors. We expedited third-party verification of our existing installations. We invited key builders and developers to tour our production facility and witness our quality control protocols firsthand. Most importantly, we reached out to every nonprofit partner to reassure them about the safety and integrity of the homes they were building with our materials. In the midst of this crisis management, I received an unexpected text from James Harrington himself, the Westfield executive my parents had introduced me to at that family dinner nearly a year ago. "You were right to take your time with development and testing. We moved too fast. Lesson learned the hard way." It was as close to an admission of error as a corporate executive would ever make. Reading between the lines, I understood. They had tried to replicate our success without the careful research and development that had gone into our materials. The shortcuts had backfired spectacularly. 3 days into the Westfield crisis, I arrived at our office to find my leadership team already gathered, faces somber despite what appeared to be a successful mitigation of potential blowback for EcoFrame. "What's happened?" I asked, instantly alert to the tension in the room. Mia slid a tablet across the conference table. On the screen was a news article with the headline, "Harrington steps down as Westfield Development CEO amid building materials. Controversy." "There's more," Teresa said quietly. "They're discontinuing their entire sustainable materials division, effective immediately." The news was stunning. Westfield wasn't just addressing quality issues. They were abandoning the market entirely. Our most significant competitor was suddenly gone, leaving EcoFrame as the undisputed leader in the sustainable, affordable building materials space. That evening, as news of Westfield's retreat rippled through the industry, I received a call from Jessica Newman. "Matching funds are complete," she said without greeting. 3 new investors came in this afternoon. The full $20 million, Series A, is funded. "The Westfield situation?" I asked, knowing the timing wasn't coincidental. "Partly," she acknowledged, "but mostly because you handled it exactly right. You didn't gloat or capitalize on their failure. You focused on reassuring the market about sustainable materials generally. That demonstrated leadership, not just competitive advantage." As I hung up, a text arrived from my father. "You've won. Not just market share, but on your own terms. Proud of you." Standing at my office window, looking out at the manufacturing floor where our teams were preparing materials that would soon become homes for people like Maria Delgado and her children, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. From family mockery at a dinner, I couldn't afford to running a company with $40 million in Series A funding. from defensive justification, of my choices to confident leadership of a mission that was changing lives. Success hadn't come from proving my family wrong. It had come from staying true to a vision they couldn't initially see. A vision that had gradually expanded to include them in ways that honored both their strengths and my autonomy. We hadn't resolved all our differences or erased the history of disapproval and doubt. But we had found a new way forward, built on mutual respect rather than conditional acceptance. As for EcoFrame, we were just beginning. The $40 million in funding would accelerate our growth, but the metric that mattered most to me wasn't valuation or market share. It was impact, affordable, sustainable homes for families who needed them. That was the dinner I couldn't once afford, but had now provided for hundreds of others. That was the success no one could dismiss or diminish. My phone buzzed again. Mia, with a reminder about tomorrow's design review for our next generation materials. The work continued, the mission expanded, the vision remained clear. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them knowing that true success wasn't in proving critics wrong, but in creating something so undeniably right that they eventually had no choice but to recognize its value. Not on their terms, but on mine. Not for their approval, but for the purpose that had driven me from the beginning. That was the $800K deal my assistant had called about in that restaurant bathroom. Not just an investment in a company, but in a vision of what business could achieve when purpose and profit aligned. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.